Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another session of Expert Insights Live. Uh, I hope everyone can hear us. So, if you could just confirm, that would be great. If anyone can hear us, just so that we know we're not speaking into oblivion just by ourselves, that would be great. And we can then get started with the session. Let's just wait for a couple of comments if we can, or at least for like 5, 10 seconds. I'll check on my phone as well if we are live. I think we are live. I can see that.
Yep.
Okay. There we go. Thank you, Twincell. Twincell says hello. Thank you, Rahul, and thank you, Bhavesh, for confirming. Great. So we are live. So yeah, welcome. Let's start the session with firstly just informing all of you that there are a couple of giveaways. As you can see, there is a ticker going on below Lewis. Uh, there are instructions how to enter the raffle, so please do so. And while we're waiting for all of you, Lewis, who won, let's start the session with introducing yourself so the community knows who you are.
Well, thank you so much, Tushar, and thank you, Luis, for being here too. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be in this session. My name is Juan Bustos. I am a generative AI specialist at Google Cloud. Essentially, my role is to work with our partners and customers, identifying the opportunities for generative AI and working on what we call product co-innovation. Essentially, it's finding value from this technology, this fantastic technology, and seeing how this can deliver value to their customers. Luis?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Luis. I am a customer engineer at Google, and I'm specialized in generative AI. After all of the, we know what happened, right? After ChatGPT blew up, and everybody now is doing GenAI. So super happy to be here. I help my customers in the financial services space find solutions that bring value to their organizations, leveraging GenAI. I've been here at Google for about a year, and before this, I was at AWS actually with Juan for about 5 years, and also at Stripe for a little bit, also with Juan. So he's one of my close colleagues, and I'm super happy to be here with you all.
Thank you for introducing yourself, Lewis and Juan. Um, so if anyone has any queries for them, please feel free to post it in the chat. And while we wait for your queries, I've got quite a few of them, which I'll go ahead and ask. And yeah, and then we'll wait for any audience queries and we'll take them up live. So, Lewis, go on. We've heard a lot about patterns and design patterns in the developer community. Design patterns is a very well known and renowned term. So this book is Generative AI Integration Patterns. When you call it integration patterns, what do you mean and how is it different from design patterns?
Well, this is a fantastic question. I will take a first stab, and then I will let Luis dive deep in the answer. Sure, it's very interesting, and again, thank you so much for everyone to be here. This idea came up after our day jobs. We found out that a very common question was from the product leaders, from developers, understanding where this technology, where generative AI fits within their applications. There are there's a lot of content about Gen AI, how to how does this work, the story of pre-training, even on predictive AI, how you train your models, understand how it works. But there was very little to think about how you consume generative AI. Actually, in our book, in one of the first chapters, we discuss how the paradigm changed from predictive AI to generative AI. The model life cycle changed a lot, but also the way that you're integrating this with your applications changed a lot. So essentially, this is a very tactical and practical approach to where does generative AI fits in the product development life cycle, in your product journey, and how do we see it? We establish a framework, and how do we see a quick way to get acquainted to how to get value and leverage these technologies. Luis?
Yeah, well put, Juan. Like the we always get the question, right? Is everybody wants to build a chatbot first, but then we know that chatbots have limitations on how much they can do. I mean, in the back end, they might be able to like call APIs, do things, do that, but at the end of the day, it's like the input output type of problem, right? And what happens in the middle, that's where people usually get lost. Right? Like I have an input, is either coming from a chatbot, is coming from an API, is coming from someone dropping a file somewhere, and then the output is like what type of output in what format do you want? Do you want it in a JSON? Do you want it as a response? Do we clean it? Do we not clean it? And then what happened in the middle? So in our book, we wanted to make sure that we explain to people how do you get from that input all the way to the output, and a couple suggestions on what you need to do in the middle, in order to get this thing to actually do some meaningful work outside of just being a chatbot, because generative AI is more than that. And we have a framework, as one mentioned, is in the book. If you haven't read it yet, please do so, and give us any feedback that you might have.
And is this framework actually something that people are using it, like your customers at Google? So do you recommend the same framework to them?
Absolutely. This framework is actually the distillation of all the steps that we take. Both Luis and I, we are practitioners first. So we have the building mindset in mind. The way that we learn is by building and
Mhm.
actually having the opportunity to help co-building and co-innovating with our partners and customers really gives us a very good sense of what works, what doesn't work, and really how you can take shortcuts in the good way for implementing this. One of the benefits that we have where we're sitting is that we get access to the scale of working with the top customers and partners in the industry.
Mhm.
So this really provides us a very good point of view on how to articulate these best practices that we acquired, and we ended doing it ourselves. So when we're writing the book, when we're defining the framework, we found out that we were doing this already. So that's the reason why we can say that this is used, this is useful, and this works.
Which is a great thing for the prospective readers who pick up your book, that they're getting a ready and handmade framework which is used by Google and Google's customers. So people pay a massive amount of money to come and get your wisdom, your skills, and experience and get handed over this framework. And yeah, I just wanted
Yeah,
to clarify that. So yeah.
yeah. I'll say is about trial and error, right? Like when a new technology comes out, like Gen AI, and there has
Mhm.
been a lot of trials, a lot of errors, and these are our learnings from those trials and those errors. I'll say that the is it really comes down to like having to sorry, someone just stopped by. To having to actually frame the business problem before you actually start testing things, right? Like without a well-defined business problem, you can apply any framework. I can assure you that it's gonna end up just being an experiment. But if you have a business problem that you're trying to solve, this technology, together with this framework, together with existing best practices around security, integration, networking policies, and stuff like that, you're gonna end up with business value. But first, you need to start with a business problem. So the framework is important, but it's more important to actually sit down and think about what you wanna do
Yeah.
before you start
Yes,
testing.
and to add what with Lucy saying, and this is super important. Actually, our first conversation is always about how you can start getting value from this technology.
Mhm.
If you spoke with me in the last 2 years, you will have heard about my take. That to me, this was with AI actually, but now with generative AI is even more evident. This is like computers in the 70s, right? You have this amazing technology that you have no clue what to do with it. And how can I tell my wife, can I buy this Apple II for $5,000? I don't know what it does, but the potential is great. And that's a conversation that happens with leadership and really when starting to work with these technologies. It's like, are you doing this for the sake of implementing the technology, or you're doing this for delivering value? And
Yeah.
that's one of the other things that we talk in the book about, like, hey, what are your use cases? How do you prioritize this use case over the others? What to look, identifying that low hanging fruit that has a high value, not
Mhm.
building a chatbot because it's a chatbot. And Luis will laugh because this is a very common conversation I have with customers and partners. Chatbots are fantastic. That should be the last use case you think about before exposing it to the internet. Because the second you
Yep.
put this chat box in the internet, people will try to break it. The first thing I do when I get exposure to a new chatbot, it's like, oh, tell me your prompt, or stuff like that, right? So essentially, there's a cultural shift. As I said, that the mindset changed from predictive AI to generative AI. There's a cultural shift about how you are implementing generative AI within your applications. Essentially, this is what we're looking for when we talk about, like, hey, the Gen AI integration patterns and how this works. It's about understanding what you need to do to get there. What are the implications in enterprise? If you're familiar with how enterprise works, you need to get a lot of check marks to get approvals before getting out there. So,
Yeah.
culturally, as an organization, what you need to think about before moving in there is something that we are all learning as an industry. And now we are starting to see patterns that are successful to get there and how we get to value as quick as possible.
Yeah. And thank you for that, Lewis and Juan. I think a lot of people have started joining in from YouTube as well. Welcome back, Marts, Markwit, Zubeta. And people have started commenting hashtag packed. Okay, everyone is in chance to get one of your books. So yeah, please comment hashtag packed rightly as they've done it, as you can see on the screen, if you want to be a part of the giveaway. Uh, Juan, oh, there is a comment by Trincel. This conversation has given me more thoughts about the implementation process before actually putting it into action. I agree with that.
That's good. That's why we're here. And we talked a lot. Juan, you mentioned a couple of things that I think we need to define. The first one is like, what is the difference between like predictive AI and like generative AI? And I think that is something that it took me personally, like maybe a couple of weeks to try to like just articulate it. And
Uh-huh.
the difference between predictive and generative, right? Like predictive is, let's call it like a old school way of doing of doing just AI, where you have just a model that you're training. You finally tested it, everything looks good, you put it in production, you start measuring the performance, maybe there's a little bit of drift, you retrain it, and that's just like a never-ending wheel, right? That's traditional predictive AI. Let's put it that way. You're just making a prediction, an input and output prediction. With generative AI, is a different beast, right? Because now these models can come up with a bunch of stuff that you don't really know what they're doing. It's a pretty black box, and you're not retraining them. You might be fine-tuning them, or you might be doing prompt engineering or in-prompt learning, but at the end of the day, you don't have as much control, right? So now
Mm.
you have to think about what do you do around the model. The integration points are different. How are you going to massage the input, massage the output? And we talk about this in the book. So I just wanted to make the differentiation, right, between predictive versus generative AI. Just Juan, you've been mentioning quite a bit here in the in the
Yes,
in the,
actually,
in the
we
talk.
cover it in depth. Well, not in super depth, but in enough depth in the book, comparing what the life cycle looks like for predictive AI versus generative AI, positioned in use case identification. If you think about this, if you had exposure to implementing and working with predictive AI, in general, you do a very strong work about what is your use case. Then you will try to find the data. Then you will do the training, and then you will say, hey, do I get value from it or not? Right? And those are cycles that can take months.
Months.
With
Yeah.
generative AI, you of course need to work very close with your use case first, but honestly, it's so quick to get started. It's so dynamic that you can validate that fairly quickly. I recall in conversations, by the way, as you know, we have the foreword by Dr. Ali Arsanjani. He's a director in Applied AI at Google. And we had this conversation about the cycles changing. Like we have these very quick iterations that, whereas before with predictive AI, you would take 6, 7 months, you may see those cycles summarized into 1 week or maybe even days. You can actually validate an idea in hours. So it's very important to establish frameworks for success, establishing frameworks for prioritization, establishing what value are you doing first and not doing it for the sake of the tech, because this may end being like a never ending story. Luis and I constantly talk about like defining what is the success criteria when you're testing a use case with generative AI, because you may be tempted to like keep trying to improve. Actually, out of the box, most likely you will get better results than what you would have gone if starting from zero with a predictive model. But that doesn't mean that that is your end goal. So this is like generating all these conversations about planning and really taking the time to stop. Let's sit and let's analyze how are we going to create frameworks and establishing all the procedures in order to promote these use cases from POC to production. POC to production, this is the time for Gen AI. Couple of years ago, last year, it was all about POCs. Now we're starting to see like, hey, this is where real value is coming. What Luis mentioned, right? We have this fantastic black box that we didn't know it had capabilities for this. And I remember those early papers that we were talking about, like, hey, we didn't know I could do this with Gen AI. So it's a very pragmatic approach that you take, validating the use cases first versus like, hey, going to collect your data, training, etc.
Yeah, and there is still a space for traditional ML. I wanna highlight that this you might use it as a hammer and try to unscrew a screw, right? Sometimes just a good forecasting model might just do it, right? You don't need to go down the rabbit hole of like 3 months of testing and LLM when we know that there are some use cases that are probably better suited for traditional or predictive machine learning. Yeah, we'll let you talk to share. Like
No worries.
we've been going on a couple rants.
No worries. We've got our first query, uh, and it's from Markwood or Zabeta on YouTube. They inquire, given that the generative AI models are resource intensive, what are the best practices for optimizing hardware usage and minimizing training and deployment costs without sacrificing performance? What are your thoughts about this?
You want to take a stab at it first, one?
Well,
Or you want to go?
you are my to-go expert in terms of hosting models. And actually, this is super interesting because this is where there's a deviation between what you would see with predictive AI and generative AI. Essentially, the ways that consumption happens, the way that usage happens, the way that scaling happens is different. Actually, when you're thinking about MLOps for generative AI, you would be more about evaluating drift in the responses more than the actual usage. I mean, estimations for the hardware that you will need to use. And this is not a secret that GenAI is resource intensive. We're talking about large language models. They're not calling large. They're not called large for no reason, right? So establishing the parameters that you would follow to scale your resources in order to work with consumption and without sacrificing performance. Now, and before turning to you, Luis, I would add another thing that is super interesting between predictive AI and generative AI. The latency requirements and the latency standards are way different. When you're thinking about predictive AI, you're thinking about inference in terms of milliseconds. When you're thinking about generative AI, you're thinking about inference in terms of seconds. Even though models are getting quicker and faster, actually, Google released yesterday two new models, two new versions of models on the Gemini Pro, Gemini 1.5, which are Pro and Flash. Gemini Flash is actually optimized for performance and for reducing the latency and the speed. There's a change of mindset on that too. I don't know if you want to add something, Luis, about like serving and optimizing.
Yeah, and we talk about this on chapter 9. Actually, like we have the way that we like to think about anything, not only just Gen AI, but like AI ML as a whole is like different layers. So you have your data layer, your training layer, your inference layer, and then you have your ML ops around that. And we go deep into this in the book. But this to me is more on the inference slash training type of layers. And the first question that you have to ask yourself is, why do you want to host it yourself, right? When you already have massive gains on economies of scale when you're consuming it through an API. What does that mean, right? Let Google front the bill, or let Amazon front the bill, or let OpenAI front the bill for the hardware, and you focus on the inference costs. I understand there's use cases where you might want to host it yourself. For example, if you want to do inference at the edge, or you want to do inference in a highly secure environment, then you can look into technologies such as I'm forgetting the name, but you can decrease the number of bits or bytes that it
Quantization.
uses. Quantization, that's the one. Or you can do distillation too. You can take a massive model from one of the big hyperscalers, distill the model, fine tune a smaller model that requires less GPUs. So there is different techniques, but again, going back to, to the first point that we made, does it make sense to host it? Most of my customers are not hosting themselves. I have one or two, but I'm telling you, just let someone else run the video. As long as you're staying secure, right? Like make sure that you're doing data de-identification, that you're creating VPC endpoints to make sure that data is encrypted at transit. Keep your data secure and make sure you read the terms and services, and that would be my biggest advice on cost without sacrificing performance. Like,
And use case centric, right? Understand what are the requirements for a use case and what is the leeway that you can go through. And I would emphasize on what Luis said. What is the difference between a hosted version of a model we are consuming as an API and hosting it yourself? There are optimizations made by the hyperscalers. There's a lot of work and investment to get you that result, and this is up to you to evaluate. There's always a trade-off, right? There's not a generic question, but I think that to answer the question, and like everything in life, it's nuanced. It depends, aligned
depends.
to your use case.
Perfect. There is another query on LinkedIn, and unfortunately, StreamYard has run into problems again, so I can't pop it up. But I can see it on my phone, so I'll read it out. Manish on LinkedIn inquires, would be really useful to know about some use cases at an enterprise level where we have seen some initial success in integrating generative AI to legacy workflows.
That is a
Would you be
fantastic.
at liberty? Yeah,
If
sorry, go
only
ahead.
there was a place where you can find more end-to-end examples. Jokes aside, yes, I
Juan,
mean,
you're a sales guy. Just kidding.
I do think that that's a fantastic question. And actually, this was when we had the early conversations with you, Tushar, and with Luis about this book. That's what we wanted to really show. It's about like seeing examples of end-to-end use cases, inspiring you to see like what are the canonical use cases. What can we do with GenAI that it's not a chatbot? Spoiler alert, we have a chatbot example. Of course, we cannot get around that. But yes, I think that we have also one very interesting example for data extraction from financial documents that it's very compelling. There are many angles on the enterprise. Actually, one of the interesting things about generative AI is that ability to help you bridging different verticals and understanding that the same use case can be applicable on what is the difference between healthcare and financial services besides the topic, right? It's like the regulations, the different regulations that you need to abide to work. With healthcare, you will talk about HIPAA. With financial services, you have other kinds of requirements, like, for example, KYC or other government imposed regulations. Understanding the canonical use cases, data extraction, question answering, etc., is very important. And of course, we cover it in the book.
Yeah, and if we take a step one step back, right? Like the way that I see Gen AI use cases in the enterprise is really in three buckets. The first bucket is gonna be cost savings, right? So like anything that you can do to use Gen AI to save yourself or let the enterprise cost. Automation, data extraction, a bunch of stuff like workflow automation, stuff like that's cost savings. The second one is user experience. Here's where Juan's favorite use case comes in, like the chatbots, stuff like that, right? Like enhancing the user experience. It might come at a little cost, but you're also decreasing churn and you're increasing retention. So tying it to specific KPIs, right? So cost savings, user experience, and the third one is revenue generation. And in revenue generation with Gen AI, it's probably one of the most complex things to do, but we're seeing that now it's starting to pop up in the enterprise, where now you can create products that are based on Gen AI. That extraction is a great example. There's companies that pay millions of dollars a year to label data. Right? What if you could use a model, a large language model that does that extraction and also does the QA and also does the verification, and it gives you lineage and it gives you citations? That's a great product that you can go sell. So that would be a good revenue generation. And so those are the three buckets that I'm seeing in the enterprise. Again, cost savings, user experience, increasing, and revenue generation. So if you can pinpoint your use case in one of those three, attach a KPI to it, you're golden.
Your enterprise.
Just like that, we're almost at the halfway mark, and I did not even realize the time. It's flying by, just like this year. We're already at the end of October, or end of September. It's almost October. Uh, let's do our first raffle now. Anyone who hasn't read the ticker at the bottom, please read it. There's a chance to win. Two people can win the ebook for generative AI application integration patterns. There are instructions how to get that. And I'll share my screen and we'll do the first raffle about in the next 5 seconds as soon as my laptop would allow me to do so. Just let me know, gentlemen, when you can see my screen. Can you
Yeah,
see
we
it?
can see it.
Perfect. So this is what you have to do. Just enter hashtag packed in the comments and you will have one of the entries. So let's click on draw and it will randomly pick a winner. Let's see who our first winner is. Markwit Zubeta. Congratulations, Markwit. I guess this was the person on YouTube who asked the first query. Please add me up on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. Uh, just as my name appears in the post, Tushar Gupta. Just add me up on LinkedIn and drop me a line. And I would just need your email address for the book. And if you haven't won the book now, don't be disheartened. There is another raffle towards the end of the session. Please comment hashtag packed. And while we are at sharing screen, let me also show you some details about an upcoming conference that we have at PACT. And I hope that Juan and Lewis would also be a part of that conference. Uh, can you see my screen again, gentlemen?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a virtual conference coming in November. It's called Generative AI in Action. If you go on the page now, there is an early bird 40% discount going on. It's filled with a lot of things. There are a lot of different talks. What is the potential of generative AI, RAGs, decision making? And this is just day one. LLM security. There are 3 days full of talks, and there's networking opportunities as well every single day where you can meet people who are like-minded, and there are amazing speakers at this session. Hope and there are still a lot of the people in discussion. Hopefully, Lewis and Juan have the time and they could be a part of it as well. I'll share this link in the chat in some time. While we do that, let's move on with the next set of queries. So I don't think anyone in the comments have asked it, but I'll move ahead and I'll ask my queries. It gives me more time with you. So, what do you feel, Juan Lewis, are the most common challenges that developers face when transitioning from traditional AI and machine learning applications to building production ready generative AI applications?
You want
Uh,
to take the stuff, Luis?
yeah, I'll take the first cut. So I think just breaking their mental barriers, right? Because as we mentioned before, traditional ML, you identify the use case, you get the data, you train the model. Well, you get your GPUs, you set up your GPUs and or TPUs or anything that you might use. Um, then you train your model. Then you go run your unit tests. You might retrain it again, and then you deploy it to production, right? So, but now they own the model. Right? They have the model. They can see the files. They're hosting it somewhere. They have their own endpoint. When it comes to Gen AI, you're just hitting a black box, right? And you're making sure that you're trying to time that beast, right? Like you're creating a specific prompt, and it's all about the prompt, and it's all about how you frame the problem and you try to explain it to the model, which is a lot different than massaging data using a Spark to go create a bunch of files that then you feed into the model. So it's just a completely different thing. That's why we have this new role of like prompt engineers that didn't exist a couple of years ago. Um, so just that transition, I feel like is one of the biggest ones. The loss, the sense of loss of control on the model is another one, and a cost could also be big. As we saw the question on how do we save on cost. I'll say use hosted services first before you start burning a bunch of cycles and GPUs and money to try to host it yourself. Juan, anything?
Yes, that and of course I agree. We speak about this every day, many times a day. I do think also that, as Luis said, there are some nascent categories that you will start seeing. Like, for example, I had a conversation, well, many conversations about prompt management. Think about there's a how can I say it? There's an assumption that the prompts that you use with certain model will work with other models. Actually,
Mm,
as models are becoming more sophisticated and streamlined, you may start seeing like some kind of this may work. Uh, but in general, if you're thinking about using two different models, you need to optimize your prompts for the model. There are nuances in the usage of the models. Even though the model could be the most advanced model in the world, you will need to do some optimization. I had conversations with customers about, hey, I'm trying model X and it doesn't work with the things that they work out of the box with Model Y. And when you start asking them, how long did it take for you to make this prompt working properly with Model Y? And they will say, oh, no, it's been a couple of months. So there was work, there was prompt engineering work going on in there that that optimization happened. So this is not, we have assumptions and we have all these ideas of how the models should work. And actually, every model, even changing the version of a model, you will need to keep track of your prompt management and your results and how it's working. You need to still have your golden set of queries, run them on every iteration to see if there is drift in the responses. And this is something that also the life cycles changed a lot. Think about using an LLM that was state of the art 2 years ago. How do you feel about it?
It's bad now.
Not now, but also there are expectations from the industry because of the use of long-term support, that there's an expectation that models will be available for 4 years. And it's in your
mm,
best interest that you may want to work with the newer models that are more efficient, are more sophisticated, and even they're more cost effective. So
Mhm.
essentially changing that mindset about like what will you build around this black box that we call LLMs is something that you need to keep in mind when building and integrating LLMs into your applications. It's fascinating. We are learning as the industry progresses, and And I'm very grateful to be able to witness this on the front row, how this technology evolves and how everything changes. Like talking about AI with my parents a couple years ago would have been like ridiculous. And today they're like, oh, look what I got from ChatGPT or Gemini.
Also, one thing I'll add there is like take the answers from GenAI, take them with a grain of salt, right? Like ground your models on data that you found trustworthy. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, these models are probabilistic models, right? So like they create an output, and that output becomes the input to the next prediction, which creates the next output. So if you think about that, if the first output is wrong, the rest of the outputs are gonna be wrong. So you gotta make sure that anything that you feed into the model to make its first prediction or its first like token prediction has to be the correct thing. Because if not, it's gonna derail itself into something that we call a hallucination. And
Super,
yeah,
super important. And maybe we made an assumption that everybody's familiar with these terms. But as Luis defined, hallucinations are, in other words, models being very safe saying wrong things. Essentially, there's no factual guarantee when working with models unless you're grounding your answers. And this is like top of mind with enterprise on actually any uh, implementation of any application using LLMs. Essentially, you need to ground your data. You may have heard about RAG, retrieval augmented generation. If you have not, we have a chapter in the book where we talk about retrieval augmented generation, which essentially, in a nutshell, RAG is exposing context to your model. If you think about this, the models in their true state are stateless. They don't keep track of what you're doing. Actually, you need to build around that, and that's part of like how you're building the applications. So essentially, for it to reduce the hallucinations, you need to expose context to the model. That can be, for example, doing a search, or you may have context about your HR policies, or depending on your use case, it's what you're going to do. So essentially, RAG is exposing content or context to the model for it to elaborate the answers. And this is like the most common technique that we use to reduce hallucinations. There are other more sophisticated techniques that may involve also querying databases or doing other kinds of things. But for today, the gold standard is RAG.
Perfect. I think you've already answered the next question. Did you read it in the chat or did you just preempt it? What is the limitation of Gen AI? I think you both have very well answered that.
yeah.
I'll skip it. Tinsel
Uh,
asks,
mhm.
sorry,
No,
go ahead.
we didn't speak about the limitation of GenAI, and maybe we can talk briefly
Yeah.
about this. One of the things, one of the first, I mean, I think that the first reality check was when hallucinations started to happen here and there. There was even a case with an airline that the chatbot quoted a ticket, and there was a lawsuit, and it was like really bad. The other one is like me, LLMs are really bad at math. Uh, they have
Yeah.
become better and better, but in their initial state, they were not able to do that. Actually, if you look on the internet about funny prompts, that's another thing, right? You will see like where LLMs fail. Like for example, and this is more applicable for the previous generation. The newer generation became really good. Actually, one of the characteristics of Google Gemini is that it punts when it doesn't know. So that's something that also helps preventing hallucinations. So that to say that the limitations, as they are a black box and we don't know their capabilities, we understand some of the limitations. And this is why always before putting going to production, create a test suite, have a set of golden queries that you will submit to the LLMs, keep track of that, validate that you're getting the results that you're getting, validate that this is not a hallucination. Anything to add to that, Luis?
Yeah. So I always go down into into the beginnings on like where did these models come from, right? Like these models, and I'm talking about this because the Juan, you touched a nerve, right? Like these models don't know what to do with math. It's the funniest thing just to ask. If you go write a prompt and say what is 1.12 minus no what is larger, 1.12 or 1.09, uh, or no, 1.9, is gonna tell you that 1.12 is bigger than 1.9,
It
right?
has more numbers.
Yeah, because it's looking at the one at a dot and an 11 versus a one and a dot and a nine, right?
Yeah.
And we know that point 0.9 is bigger than point 0.11, right? But it will tell you that the 11 is bigger than the 9. So from a linguistic perspective, the model is in theory correct, but if you separate the tokens in that order, but from a mathematical perspective, is incorrect. These models are language models, right? So they have been trained on finding the characteristics that have the most weight when they are put together. So the attention paper, right, is it's just what is more correlated to something else, and these are just language, just words, tokens, stuff like that. And now, when you're trying to make the model do math, is a completely different beast, right? So for that, traditional, just the calculator tool that a model can use. So teach the model how to use a calculator. The funniest thing, how you're gonna see your
Mm.
metrics improve, and the calculator, you could just point it to Python, right, or something. So the limitations is treat these models as if they are not very smart. They know they know how to seem smart and sound smart because they're really good at language. But from a logical perspective, and they have been improving, and a mathematical perspective, huge gap there. Um, Other limitations is mostly size at this point, right? It's like how much data you can put in. Right? Like now the models are becoming a multimodal, right? You can throw in different modalities of data, meaning you can throw in a picture, you can throw in a table, you can throw in a voice note or a video, and then the models are able to process that. We're probably gonna start seeing some limitations coming out of that type of modality or interactions with the model. But for now, I think the models are doing pretty well, in my opinion. It's just the math. No, you got me going. One.
Yes, and again, this all has to do with identifying your use case, finding if you're getting the responses you're looking for, and if you're not, how to get closer to there. It's about that.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. And Trincel Shelvin on LinkedIn inquires, should the prompts be limited to specific use in an application or trained to learn how to adapt to an input presented for better learning?
This is a fantastic question. And to provide some context, in prompt engineering, there's a technique called in context learning. In context learning is a fancy way to say provide examples when you're talking. So I'm not sure if this question is about how to have populate prompts that may have variables. That it's absolutely correct. You can have like a template for the prompt. You can actually extract data from one question and then use it in the template and then pass it, or you can change. You may have different prompts for different stages. Actually, another of the examples that we have in our book has to do with intent classification, which essentially you're using generative AI to understand what the person is trying to do. Once you understood what is the intent behind the question, then you can do something else downstream. And that can be like creating a different query, querying a database, answering a question, etc. So to your question, Trincel, and thank you so much again for asking this question. I do believe that it's not written into stone. It will depend on how you adapt, but you may want to have different kinds of prompts for different actions that you're doing. Also, super relevant. For example, Google Gemini accepts what we call the system instructions, which is another prompt that will define the model behavior. Like, for example, you are an expert in marketing, creating a marketing campaign for XYZ. and then in your prompt you will say, hey, create a campaign for puppies or something like that. So essentially it depends. I hate that my question is always it's nuanced and it depends. But the guidelines are in general you should have a specific prompts, and actually in my personal test I rather have the tasks delimited. I like to have, like, for example, the first step for intent classification and then doing more sophisticated tasks than having one large prompt for everything.
Yeah. Yeah, plus one to everything that Juan said. I would say, if I'm understanding your question correctly, like if you're asking between what is the difference between prompt engineering and fine tuning, um, prompt engineering. Oh, okay, you got it. Okay, so
Yeah,
prompt engineering,
yeah, she's
just it.
confirmed
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. So then, do you have another question, or I don't want to repeat what Juan said.
Thank you, Trancel. If anyone has any other queries, please feel free to ask them in the chat. Until then, I think we have about time for about a couple of more queries. I have a few more queries, so I'll ask you that. Let's see which one should I pick up. So let's pick up this one. How do you address the challenge of balancing computational efficiency and model complexity when deploying generative AI models in production?
We sort of touched on this already. If you want to
Okay,
pick a
you did.
different question, yeah. Like again, just a brief answer, right? It depends on your use case. If you have to
Yeah.
host the model, distill it, cook, quantize it, or if not, just go for the API.
I think most of the queries that I have prepared, you've already answered them with the help of other queries. I'm just thinking if you've answered this or not. Ta-ta. Right, let's pick this one up. So, for people in data science and research, what deeper insights about generative AI does the book offer beyond standard machine learning models? So, let's talk a bit about the book over here. I can
So
even
thinking about the capabilities that go beyond predictive AI, is that the question?
no. So, basically, I'm just trying to understand what are the different things that the book would cover uh, beyond standard machine learning models. Yeah,
Oh, got it.
predictive is what you called it. Yeah.
Yes, and one of the things that we try to distill in this book is the experience we acquire over the last 5 or 6 years working with production ready machine learning applications and implementations. One of the first things that we do is to talk about what is the difference in the paradigm from predictive AI to generative AI, what this life cycle looks like, defining, like, hey, identify your journey, identify where you fit. Then we have a chapter that's dedicated to identifying what are the most valuable use cases, thinking
Yeah.
about what use cases you need to think about, what use cases will be more valuable. Then we go into understanding, okay, you have a use case. Now we split it again into, like, we define two ways of consuming GenAI. One of them is in real time and one of them is in batch. And
Mm.
the batch one, I mean, again, there's always a bias about chatbots and the real time. But if you think the batch applications, there's a huge opportunity for work around data. Think about data enrichment, think about data generation, think about generating new data from your data. Think about using GenAI to combine two different data sets. Think about the insights that you're getting. Think about moving into analytics, generating analytics from data exposed. So there are many applications that go beyond what real time is. Of course, the most immediate, and actually why the boom happened for GenAI is for the real time, the chatbot. But also we like to explore that. And then we delve into what the operations are. What do you need to think about operationalizing? Actually, Luis is an expert in that aspect, and also the responsible AI capability. And this is super interesting. And before moving to Luis, for him to augment those sections, it's very important philosophically to understand that generative AI won't replace humans. Generative AI will augment humans. This is another thing that I also talk about a lot, that has to do, imagine in industrial revolution, when the steam machine was introduced. I haven't heard anybody complaining about pushing a rock, right? We remove the physical requirements from humans and animals and move it into machines. And with generative AI, we are removing some of this intellectual load to help us amplifying, getting a summary before diving deep into something, getting insights that we may have missed, getting expertise from humans being more efficiently communicated to other humans to make decisions. So those are the aspects that we need to think as this progresses as an industry, to really work on a responsible way and do not harm. Luis?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Like from what will you get from this book, right? I think you'll get insights into how to make this useful, right? It's like it's very easy to get into the rabbit hole of just running experiments because we want to play with something. But when you think about the enterprise, or even like a mid-size or even a startup, right? Like how can you actually take advantage? What is the return on investment of not only your time but also the resources that you're putting in? So in the book we cover frameworks, we cover um, steps, examples. We even give you like some outputs from image generation on GenAI. We were trying to have fun writing this book, and I make it very personal in such a way that you are getting something out of it, right? Like when you get the book, you get our insights, like Juan said, from if it's like from a responsible AI perspective. We made the choice of covering two examples on how, first of all, Google does it, right? Red teaming the inputs and outputs of models. How does that look like? Do you like um, send that to do you let the model provider do that for you, or do you do it in house? So we have some opinions on that. Also, we look at Anthropic. That's probably one of my favorite papers that I read about responsible AI, with their um, almost like the Senate concept of having multiple inputs to try to find a unity on what safe means, right? If you think about diversity is good, but it could also be bad. So how do you define what is good and what is bad in these models, and the inputs and outputs? Is some sort of like an art more than really like a process. um, so all of these ideas, and challenges that we might face when we're creating technology, and how we're embedding this technology into tools. So, for example, from a responsible AI perspective, if you're creating an HR tool that reviews resumes, you want to make sure that your model is not gonna create any bias, right? Like, then you might want to pick a model that aligns better with your ethics and your company's values, or you might want to fine tune a model yourself, right? So, like, how do you make those decisions? That's kind of how we're trying to frame the problem, right? Like, with very specific use cases, real world scenarios that you really don't sit down and think about all day. But Juan and I, we kind of have to because that's our job.
Yeah, you rightly ended on the responsible AI chapter. The next comment is from Andrea on LinkedIn, who says that apart from all the use cases and practical examples you share throughout your book, I love seeing a chapter promoting responsible AI.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Andrea.
thank you, Andrea.
All right, on that note, I think it's time for our last raffle. We are almost close to the end of the session. So let's do our last raffle. Very quickly, I'll share my screen once again. And here it is. And our first winner was Markwith Subeta. I tried looking up for you on LinkedIn and I couldn't find you. If you can just share your name on the chat, probably I can look up for you, or yeah, just look me up and yeah, just get in touch with me. Let's do the draw again and let's see who the winner is. Ta-ta. Swapna Velpula on YouTube. Congratulations, Swapna. Again, there is a winner from YouTube. There are both the winners today are from YouTube. So, Swapna, if you can see the message, if you can see this on your screen, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn, Tushar Gupta. That's how you spell my full name. Get in touch with me, and I'll ensure you get your ebook. Uh, Gentlemen, before we wrap up the session, are there any closing notes that you would like to share with the audience and our viewers?
Well, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I'm very, very grateful for the reception we are getting from the book, the questions we are getting, the reviews. We really appreciate everybody taking the time for doing that. Uh, it's been super, super interesting and a super fun experience to work on a book um, where essentially we want to translate into value what we have learned. I do think that this is a very exciting time. We are witnessing firsthand in this industry this new technology that most likely actually it's already shaping our daily lives. And this is like a not only a technological but also a cultural, cultural aspect that we're witnessing. So thank you so much. Take a look at our book. Please provide feedback. Thank you so much, Luis.
Yeah, echoing what Juan said. Like, thank you so much for whoever has gotten the book. I appreciate the support. For whoever has not gotten the book, please
Please get the book.
say it again.
No, you cut off a little bit, but I was finishing
Oh,
the sentence.
okay, okay. Yeah, no, for whoever got the book, thank you so much for the support. And for whoever does not have the book yet, get your copy. I'm pretty sure you're gonna enjoy it. We have a GitHub page that you get a lot of code to play with, and feel free to reach out. Right? Like Juan and I are just we're like you, right? Like we're people. We reply to messages. Feel free to reach out, and we're here to help.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. And I think it's about time for us to end the session. We'll see you soon in the next episode. Whenever that happens, I'll announce it on LinkedIn and YouTube. Thank you again, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you,
Bye.
Tushar. Appreciate it.
Thank you
Have a
so
good day.
much.
Bye bye.